With that, I am really excited to introduce our next speaker and our next talk. So very stereotypical, right? Women are much better with words, with language, with expressing ourselves than men. Kathrin Rohrmeier is going to be our next speaker, and she is, so her talk is about Sticks and Stones and Words, an introduction to why language matters. And Kathrin, she's a front-end engineer at Propeller Health, and she writes stuff, as she puts it, code words as in speculative fiction and poetry. So that's very interesting. So she's a writer of code and prose and interested in the intersectionality and other things in between. So let's get started. I am excited to introduce Kathrin Rohrmeier. And is she on? There she is. All yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? First.
Yes,
okay.
Loud and clear.
Excellent. And, oh, I can share my screen. Okay. I will start with this process of setting up. Can you, oh, maybe, yes. I think now you can see the words on the screen. Is this correct?
Looks good.
Awesome.
Yes.
All right, now I gotta find my words. They're somewhere. All right. Thank you so much for the introduction. A slight correction, I am a they. I contain multitudes. But yes, I write words. I write speculative fiction, poetry, and now I also write code. So I was a child immigrant and grew up in between, and I think that is part of why language and science fiction is so interesting for me, because I think that's how I grew up feeling. So, Sticks and Stones and Words. This is an introduction to why language matters. Thank you kindly, everyone, for being here and spending time with me and all of us today. For the next half hour, we're going to talk about the biases and prejudices which are built into the technologies and the systems which we use every day. As anti-racism points out, if we do nothing, right, we perpetuate these biases and injustices. And one technology that we all use on a daily basis is language. And because bias is woven into language, just as it is in any other system, technology, if we're ignorant of this, we will perpetuate it. And as technologists, I believe we have a responsibility to examine and refine how we use technology, including that of language. So by studying some basics of the philosophy of language, we can better understand what language is doing, and through that, learn to choose our words more carefully. I believe that with greater empathy and knowledge, we can learn to use language in ways that are more respectful and inclusive. So a note here, I will be touching on difficult topics: ableism, racism, sexism, colonialism. And while I will discuss and present in as respectful a manner as I know how, these topics can nevertheless, of course, be triggering. I'd also like to acknowledge that here in Madison, Wisconsin, if we were gathering in person, that we are here on occupied land. This is the home of the Ho-Chunk Nation. So what am I saying? In short, I'm saying words matter. Why? How? Well, communication, speech, is an action, and all actions have consequences. So when we speak, when we communicate, we are doing something. What are we doing? Well, depends. But for example, if we have said something helpful, we've helped someone. we have said something harmful, we've hurt someone. We can condemn, vilify, accuse, belittle, or we can comfort, support, can forgive, or accept, all with just a few words. So in short, what we say affects people. Perspective is, right, literally our view of something. And when we talk, we're sharing this perspective with others, the listeners. We're inviting others to look through this lens at the world, to step in and see our view. So we're creating a shared reality in this way. And we are responsible for what we create. So I am challenging all of us here to create and reinforce positive and supportive worldviews, and to invite others to join us. So there's another phrase you might have heard. Word is bond. A bond, right? Binding, bound, to tie together or hold together. And I think word is bond suggests that what we say, it binds us. It binds us to what we've said, to that reality we've created, and to the hearer. You are bound by your words to someone, in short. And I want this to linger in our minds while I take a step back and talk about language from a broader perspective as a system. So I'm stating that language is a technology and that it is biased. And insight into and work regarding the dismantling of structural and systemic racism, sexism, and ableism, I believe can be used to understand those biases in language as well. So consider that language is not a neutral medium that you can simply appropriate, but that comes to us, it's populated with the intentions in which it has lived its socially charged life. This is a paraphrase of Mikhail Bakhtin's theories. Bakhtin was a Russian literary theorist and a philosopher of language, and his wide-ranging ideas influenced Western thinking in many topics. He developed a theory which states that rather than being static, language evolves dynamically. It is affected by and affects the culture that both produces and uses it. So, language is affected by the culture that produces it, and language affects the culture that uses it. Mecca, an engineering director at Google, in a great talk on building inclusive engineering teams, described culture as nothing more than the set of behaviors that are rewarded and punished. Behaviors that are allowed, rewarded, or punished. Behaviors which are stated as not allowable, but which do not actually get punished. Those are biases, and they're woven into everything that societies create. And therefore, language is power. How am I arriving at this conclusion? For one, language shapes reality. Okay, it shapes our view of and our relationship to reality. Now, we can define reality as the realm of all that is real and possible, or what we believe is possible, right? And if you control that, you can control what is generally accepted as possible. And therefore, language is incredibly powerful as a paradigm for understanding the world around us. Our worldview encompasses our relation to that reality, how we view and judge ourselves and others, right? What we think about, how we feel, even what we dare to dream. So how can we create or relate to ideas such as identity or self-realization or the future, culpability or responsibility, if we don't have words to describe or understand, to learn about or communicate these ideas? What if the only people you saw talking about something looked or sounded nothing like you? If no one you identify with talks about certain topics, how likely are you to feel nurtured or included or possible in those spaces where these things are talked about? How likely are you to enter into a field that you don't have a vocabulary for? And therefore, how likely is it that you would be the first person that you know of to do that thing? So this is something Joanna Russ wrote about in How to Suppress Women's Writing. In an article Lee Mandelow wrote about this book, Mandelow says, one of the things that Russ refers to time and time again in How to Suppress Women's Writing is that the history of women writers is written on sand. Each generation feels that they're the first and the only to want to be a writer, and that they must somehow do this on their own. Similarly, feminist history is in a state of perpetual erasure. And in the book, Russ documents women writers so thoroughly that she creates a history for others to see. So view of the world, which lets others know that there were many talented women writers, right? It can be proven, it's not a new thing. Mandelow writes that this history defeats the pollution of agency, that it creates a sense of continuity and community. So terms such as pollution of agency, ideas of erasure, these are words that we use to describe marginalization, right? This is part of the process of disenfranchisement. And this, of course, does not only apply to women writers, as we know today. If we look around, as we've just heard in the previous talk and other talks, this is everywhere. So language is nothing short of the power to shape reality. Language creates continuity by creating the narrative. Continuous narrative creates history, and history creates possibility, the past opening a gateway into the future. Because if it was done before, we know for a fact it's real, right? That it can be done again, and that you are not alone. It's powerful. So please consider how language has been used in genocide. How has language been used to colonize people? How has language been used to oppress people? How has language been used to control people? How has language been used to other people? And you only need to read history books or good science fiction, like The Handmaid's Tale, 1984, and look around. The US Indian boarding school policy, or Chinese re-education of the Uyghur minority, to find answers to these questions. Language and genocide. Indian boarding school policy was expressly intended to implement cultural genocide through the removal and the reprogramming of American Indian and Alaskan Native children to accomplish the systematic destruction of Native cultures and communities. Between 1869 and the 1960s, so that is in living memory, hundreds of thousands of Native American children were removed from their homes and communities and placed in boarding schools, which were operated by the federal government and white churches. Children were taken without parents' consent, so they were kidnapped and taken to schools far away where they were punished for speaking their language. They were stripped of clothing, hair, personal belongings, behaviors that reflected their culture. They suffered physical, sexual, cultural, and spiritual abuse and neglect for speaking their language, treatment that in many cases constitutes torture. And it was not until 1978, the passing of the Indian Child Welfare Act, that Native American parents gained the legal right to deny their children's kidnapping placement in these off-reservation schools. So I do not have the same relationship to language as someone who went through these atrocities, right? But I hope that you can start to see how language is used to harm people, how language and the taking away of language has been used to commit genocide. You may not have, oh.
Sorry, Kathrin, if I can interrupt for just a moment. There's Maggie, there's a couple questions from Maggie. She's asking, how likely are you to enter a field that you don't have a vocabulary for? And how likely are you to be the first person to do that thing? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That it can't, obviously it happens, but that we are setting, if this is the culture we create, we set up barriers that do not need to be there. And by doing so, we will likely not have as many people entering fields that would otherwise enter them if it were presented as possible and people were encouraged. I don't have numbers, but right, we have statistics of how many different demographic types are in the different fields, and we can see that they are significantly lacking in fields that are considered male-dominated, and then depending on how you look at different demographics, how many women of color, Black women, Native women, so forth, are in these fields. And I think that in and of itself is part of, shows us that these barriers do in fact have an impact. But I don't have any exact numbers now. Sorry.
No, thank you for that.
Language and this relationship to language is different, right, for different people, depending on what has happened to them, of course. And well, we might not have thought about it before, but language is a technology that has been used, and it continues to be used as a tool of oppression. I want us to start thinking about this because while it might not be your or my experience, it is experience of many people. And so I'm challenging us to learn more and to be more aware and careful with how we use this technology. What else does language do? It shapes us. When we aren't allowed to use our own words or our own language, right, that harms us. Language is one of the tools we have to build our identities and our world, and how we can know each other. And that process is a process of labeling. Therefore, labeling, using language in this manner, is power. And the question that I hope you're wondering is, well, who labels whom and how? Alex Capitan, known as the radical copy editor, writes, in Western culture, non-trans people have for centuries created the language that describes us, that's trans people, and that this language has long labeled us as deviant, criminal, pathological, unwell, and or unreal. So I'd like us to consider that the words available to you to describe yourself as are ones that define you as criminal, as pathological, as sick. But these are the words you have. This is the lens, right, the perspective that you and others are given with which to see yourself. On the screen here, this is the radical copy editor's edit of harmful phrases that are often used to describe trans people. And I do have a link to all of my references, including this, which I will post. So language shapes us. We're talking about identity. Which words are available to describe you? With which words are you allowed to identify? Which words are available to show respect? So I'm not sure how this is going to work, so I do have a bit of a lag, but let's try it. For the next 3 slides, I'm going to show a word, and I would like you to type into the chat the first thing that comes to mind when you hear that word, if you're comfortable doing so. or just think about what comes to mind when you hear each word. I actually need to look at the chat. Here we are. So look at what technology can do. I think there's a bit of a lag. So the first word.
I'll take care of updating you on the words that crop up, so you can focus on the.
Thank you kindly.
Yeah.
So where am I? Here I am. Mistress. Anything that comes to mind. Probably it's not the definition, but you have an impression, you have thoughts. Might be the last time you heard the word, or maybe it was in a movie.
That is such an old word. I don't think outside of movies and books, I don't think I've heard that in real life. In real life, I personally have not.
That's good news.
Oh, so we have a couple words. Hussy, slut, cheater. Right. Very negative.
Yeah. Excellent.
A secret, liaison, shame, the other woman.
Yes. Right.
Improper.
Oops, I went past it. Come back. Mistress is the female equivalent of master, and thus it means a woman having control or authority. And we already heard this next word, hussy. So probably similar terms come to mind since it did come up with mistress. So I'm going to move ahead and give you the definition, which is that originally this was simply a term meaning the female head of a household. It came from the conjunction of the words huswife, housewife. That's what a hussy is. Obviously now we have other definitions. And madam. Any different thoughts on madam?
BSDM, as somebody's mentioning that.
Yep.
Shameless is another one.
Right. So thank you, everyone. Madam is the female equivalent of sir, a woman of high rank. So if we're thinking about the male equivalents of these terms, I think sexism comes into sharp relief, right? We can see the differences of these terms in terms like them: master for mistress, sir for madam, governor for governess, bachelor for spinster. And the male list, right, speaks to power and high status, whereas the female list of words has a very different set of connotations. They're either subordinate of status, such as governess or spinster, or in sexual service to men, such as madam or mistress. But at one time, these were simply equivalents. So how can we speak to and acknowledge a woman's power given this language? More questions to consider. What does it mean to stand for something? What does it mean to be an upright person? What does it look like to stand proud? What do crooks look like? What does it mean to be twisted? Can you be an upright person if you can't stand? If you have chronic pain or another disability which keeps you in bed, are you taking it lying down? What happens to how we view one another when we internalize these common ableist traces? When these are the ways we have to express forthrightness and deviousness, right? Why is coming up with non-ableist counterparts so difficult? It's difficult because it is baked in. I'm going to adapt a writing exercise from Writing the Other, a class based on the book of the same name by Cynthia Ward and Nisi Shaw. It's an adjective exercise. We all love adjectives. I do. I'm going to supply you with words, with adjectives, and you're going to use them to describe a person or a character that you pick. So you pick a person, character, human-esque, and then you will write a few sentences or compose in your mind or wherever works for you, a few sentences to describing that person with the terms that I provide you, which I will do in a moment, but I wanted to set up what's happening here. You have about a minute so someone you know or character you know well. Doesn't matter if they're real or fictional, of course, so long as you know them. So, character, person in mind. If the person you chose is a man, only use adjectives from the first list that I give, and they will be labeled. So list 1, try to use 4 adjectives to describe your person character. The person you chose is a woman, only use adjectives from the second list, list 2. Again, try to use 4 adjectives from that list. And if you chose a person who is trans, gender, queer, or non-binary, use 2 words from each list. I'm going to show you each one briefly. I will, again, bring them both up so you don't need to memorize these. But this is if you chose a man. And list 2 for if you chose a woman, and or 2 from each if you chose non-binary, genderqueer person. So these are the lists and labeled. I hope you can see them. This one here for men and non-binary, and this one for women and non-binary. I'm just going to give us a little time to think about and construct a few sentences.
I'm keeping an eye on the chat, so.
Okay. Oh, and the chat's a great place to type too, because that's right there. I forgot to look at the timer. Do we have any descriptions yet?
Not yet, but I can start. So I was thinking of my sister. She lives in Australia. So the 4 words that I choose for her: magnetic, powerful, leader, warrior. I can go on. She's an amazing person.
Awesome. All right. So I think we've had a little time. I would like us to think about how that felt. If it was awkward or if it was normal.
So we have a couple. Pearl says Abraham has a feisty beard and a perky sense of humor. Rebecca says Elizabeth Bennet. Oh yeah, Pride and Prejudice. A bold risk taker had an audacious and magnetic way with words.
That's right. Lovely.
Choices.
If you chose a person of a different gender, how do you think it might have felt doing this exercise? And why do you think it might have felt that way? What adjectives might we list if we wanted to use this exercise, but describing people based on their racial background or based on their sexual orientation or their mental health status?
There's one more. RBG was a powerful leader. Her early career as a risk taker led to her ascent to being a logical and magnetic justice.
Yes.
Awesome.
Having talked about this before with the group, someone pointed out that they thought it was interesting that describing women using adjectives that we often use to describe men felt powerful, right? Felt good. But describing men using adjectives that we almost exclusively use for women, but that was awkward. And that, I believe, speaks to the sexism of our culture, because things that are centered around men are considered powerful and good, and things centered around women are devalued. So it's good to be male-like or manly, to have those attributes. That's part of our culture. So what this means, this is my culminating point here, the pivot, is that the meaning here, sorry, is that we do not all have the same relationship to language, just as we do not all have the same relationship to any other technology. Technologies are deeply complex and complicated systems. They are not and cannot be equally useful or accessible to all people the same way. So another way to put this, if we flip it, is that language does not treat each of us equally. Any technology is a product of the culture, and probably the dominant culture, and it is therefore imbued with those biases and beliefs. And if you are not in the dominant group, what does this mean for you and your relationship to that technology? How well can that technology support you if you're not in the in group? How likely is it to harm you? The dominant culture defines you as an insider. How are you being supported and validated by language naturally? And how is language not, and therefore you probably are not, supporting and validating people who are not in the in group? What
So
happened?
one more.
Oh, yes, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, one more comment. This from Rebecca. I feel like applying the men words feels comic. The women words felt rude. And then Kimberly says, hi, Kat, I'd like to hear more of your thoughts on this. Language is a communal exercise. It requires agreed upon rules about structure, grammar, ideas, and concepts, implicit, explicit, because without them, persons would not understand each other. How do we change our language to make the binaries of male, female, gendered, I'd like to hear more about othering in the tech industry. Kimberly.
These are great observations and questions. Thank you. I have a section on how to be a little more inclusive, so I will get there, and then happy to speak with people after and continue chat and social media, etc. But thank you for bringing up these questions. I'm glad that these are coming up. These are important. So I'm going to move on and not ignore you, but hopefully answer some of that with what I have coming up. So thank you. I'm going to have some examples here, because besides labeling, we also harm others by reappropriating or inappropriately using terminology. When we use words which are not part of our culture, that's appropriation. Or when we use words that already have meanings in other contexts, we risk diminishing or erasing other people's lived experiences. So for example, a common phrase perhaps that I hear sometimes is careful what you say around her because she's a grammar Nazi. Well, when it's spelled this way, it's incorrect. It should be capitalized because it was a political party. Oftentimes when people use this word Nazi as an adjective, they are actually more often referencing fascism or authoritarianism in general. This phrase is painful because it suggests that 6 million people were bored to death by grammar lectures, right? Which is completely untrue. People were tortured and murdered as part of genocide. So this phrase undermines the seriousness of what happened during the Nazi regime. Similarly, if you say something like, that was the worst meeting, I'm going to have PTSD for a week, or, well, you know me, I'm very OCD about my coffee. You're diminishing the effects that PTSD and OCD have on the lives of people who struggle and deal and exist with these conditions every day. The results of a boring meeting and what someone with post-traumatic stress disorder lives with, they are not equivalent. Being particular about how you like your coffee or your tea and dealing with obsessive and compulsive disorder are not equivalent. These phrases trigger people and gives the impression that these conditions are not, are like, being picky about your tea, and it's not. Also things such as, my band's called Betty and the Walkabouts, for example. Walkabout is a sacred part of many indigenous Australian cultures. So when we're appropriating cultures, terms that are especially important to people who have been and dealt with colonialization, we're diminishing and erasing that history. The term walkabout was originally used as a slur to describe Aboriginal people, as lazy. It has since been reclaimed from its colonialist origins, but that term is for people of that culture. And we shouldn't use it if it's not our culture, because especially not if we're going to gain money or use it in a monetized way. So in short, try to be aware of the context that language already has. So in short, we're saying harmful things to each other all the time. We're saying things that are ableist, sexist, racist, gender essentialist, and homophobic. So some other examples, well, that's lame. That suggests that, so you could put the word pathetic in here and it would mean the same thing. This only works if your premise is that having a physical disability is pathetic. Well, you don't look disabled implies that either someone's disability needs to be acknowledged by you to be real, and or that it needs to be a physical disability that manifests in a certain way. Right now, these are true. Gender nonconforming is a phrase I really dislike, because I'm not nonconforming. I conform to my gender just fine. It's society's definition of gender, which is wrong. Also, nonconforming suggests that I'm doing something wrong, that I'm being non-compliant, but I'm not. I'm being compliant to who I am. So easy, even your mom can use it. I hope we instantly realize that generalizing women, especially mothers, as uninformed, technologically or intellectually inferior is wrong. It's just sexist. Please do not define your technology as intuitive or easy by using this or a similar phrase. A quote from the article Words Matter. Finally, tech looks at removing exclusionary language. I come from a world where when somebody says, hey, this hurts me, you just stop doing it. And I hope that is something we can bring into our cultures, our work cultures. Because it's a lot of information, it's a lot of don't do these things. So what are we supposed to do? We should change how we use language, in short. So why? Maybe I don't know, maybe you're not asking. I hope you're not, because hopefully you want to change these things because you care, because biased systems hurt many people in many ways. And if you didn't care about people, besides being the moral and right thing to do to change this, know that unfairness and biases cost companies financially, also in productivity and in quality. So where might you start looking to make these changes? How are we supposed to know if we're using language unfairly? Some chances are that we do know already, or that we're getting feedback already. So listen to people, listen to feedback. And when someone tells you something, don't dismiss them. Truly listen. Some places to look. Compare how you describe or praise people across different demographics, across groups. What are the differences? Oh, I'm sorry. At any rate, Kapoor Center's, there was a 2017 Tech Levers study. They found that the workplace culture drives turnover, significantly affecting the retention of underrepresented groups, costing the industry more than $16 billion each year. So the words that we choose become part of our culture, right? They represent our culture at work. Words you choose when you're writing an evaluation determines if someone gets a pay raise, determines if someone even gets hired. To begin with, it determines if someone applies to the job. How do we portray cultural norms when they're not ours or of the dominant culture? Do you portray them as normal or as other? Maybe you don't even include them. The words we choose determine whether or not someone feels invited, normal, whether they decide to click learn more on our website, whether or not they make it through the enrollment process because they can enter their name correctly and without hassle, and so on. Other ways we can change this and keep from perpetuating the violence and bias is that we can choose words which are more accurate, less loaded, more inviting, and words which are not exclusionary. So in writing, we have a saying that racist and sexist writing is often poor writing. It's a sign of poor craft because there are more accurate and expressive words and phrases than tired cliches, which are often based on oppressive stereotypes. As a creator of content, I am responsible for what I create, and I'm obligated to do my best to write stories which do not add cultural or personal harm. And as technologists, we are similarly responsible for our code and databases, our internal as well as our customer-facing content. So removing exclusionary language, looking at both internal and external documentation. For example, are birth givers referred to in the feminine pronoun she, or do you use gender-neutral pronouns because women are not the only ones who give birth? In your code base, do you have John Doe or something similar used for tests and placeholder text? Or do you have names from many cultures, subcultures, and regions, and not just white, male, Anglo-Saxon Protestant names? What are your repos named? Because GitHub just announced that it will be using main going forward. Common exclusionary language is blacklist, whitelist terminology. The racism in such black is bad, white is good metaphors is inappropriate and it needs to cease. This terminology only makes sense if you equate white with good, permitted, safe, and black with bad, dangerous, forbidden. These are obvious problems with this dichotomy. So instead of blacklist, whitelist, you can have allow or deny, which is more specific, right? Nothing is actually black or white. You're allowing and you're denying, or you're saying these are safe, these are unsafe. Instead of mob programming, we could have whole team, collaborative, troop programming. Instead of master branch, we can have main, trunk, and then my favorite is you could have twigs. So we can be more thoughtful, right? Master slave is not actually a very accurate description. More accurate would be primary, secondary, or an orchestra analogy of conductor, musician. So do not care more about words than you do about people. And to answer a previous question, language is naturally an open system. It is only closed if you support the idea of a standard language with correct usage. Right? When you elevate a particular language style, such as Standard English, which just means as spoken by those in power, right? The dominant group, the dominant paradigm, you're suppressing everyday speech types. It's just a fancy way of just saying how people talk normally. You're saying that those are different and less than. And the everyday speech types, tend to be spoken by people in communities that are marginalized and are underrepresented. And I haven't been bringing these up, I'm sorry. The closure of language in this manner is often associated with nationalism. So are you gatekeeping based on language? Are you excluding people based on how they speak? Do you think differently or act differently on people with an accent? Because that just means they speak differently than you do, because we all have an accent, right? What's deemed acceptable, what's deemed as vulgar, is based on power, no intrinsic rightness or wrongness. Because the very definition of the word vulgar means characteristic of or belonging to the masses, common. That's it, right? The masses are people who are poor and don't have power. What they say is vulgar. So people who speak using a different language paradigm or accent are often thought of as less educated or less intelligent or less deserving of rights, regardless of their actual educational background or intelligence. As with anything, please have empathy and listen to others. You can use language, to learn and to support and to connect. It can help others understand. So when we listen, especially if someone corrects you, please thank them. Understand that we're all learning. Learn more languages, right? The best way to know what we don't know is to learn. Read and listen widely to people that you don't usually listen to, or people whose voices and perspectives you don't usually hear. And iterate. We're programmers, or we're around programmers, right? We know about iterating and learning from our mistakes. Please don't fail so fast that you hurt people if you could have done a little more time doing research, but know that this is the process. Be empathetic. So remember, you're not alone. We are all in this together. And that means we're responsible for each other. We're bound to one another. Word is bond. So please speak well to one another. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. That was really exceptional. One comment from Rebecca. She's just sharing a story that an anecdote. So she says, we didn't find out our name field stripped punctuation until somebody with a single quote in their name tried to enter the name. So how well would Kilaya, Khi apostrophe or a single quote Laya be able to put their name correctly in your database? So it's something to be aware of. But that was really, really informational. Do you have any, especially if we want to educate ourselves, do you recommend any books, any websites, anybody, any YouTube people, blogs?
I do have the resources and the quotes and many other resources and articles. The talk by Mecca, the engineer at Google, is excellent. And I have those in slides and then realized, well, that's not very useful. So I'm going to post them under my Twitter handle, Kathrin Kurla. I can't use umlauts usually when I enter my name. And so I will be posting the resources. But yeah, there are many, and listening to people helps a lot. Sorry, don't have well, I can forward through. Here's a couple. Here's Mecca's. Yes, this is an excellent talk, and some history on Native American, how we describe male and female job applicants differently. It was a good, not good, but it was a good read. And how, yeah, we have different criteria for different groups, which we usually do not, are not conscious of, and we don't therefore articulate. And then these things, right, slip under the radar.
Thank you again so much, Kathrin. That was really, really informational. I think we will share that. If you share that in the chat, that would be perfect. Yes.
I will I will copy paste, put it in the chat, and then you'll also find it on my Twitter.
Yes, and you should look at the chat comments. People have some really good things to say about your talk. Where's the applause button? Thank you, Kat. That was amazing. Lots of good resources to help me improve my writing to make it more inclusive. I agree, it's hard not to be able to clap at the end of the talk. I keep grasping for the clap emoji reaction. So definitely check those out. If people don't have any questions, and once again, thank you so much for this. I think we have a short break and we will start off at 3:15. Thank you again, Kathrin. That was really, really amazing.
Thank you kindly. And I'll share these. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.